Usually, when the seasons change from hot to cold, we see an insurgence of viral infections. Not being able to differentiate between a common cold or flu versus the Ebola virus can become a reality if we don't stop non essential traveling from West African countries. I don't know about you, but that is scary for me. As a citizen of the United States, I understand some of the basic knowledge about the Ebola virus through media outlets, as well as evaluating current research, and I do believe I have a pretty good understanding of how we can stop the Ebola virus. The Ebola virus is one of the most deadliest diseases, and we must take it serious. We cannot take this lightly, as we must evaluate a mandatory airban policy for civilian travels, also assessing a mandatory quarantine policy for those aid workers who will go over and assist in West Africa, while providing a solution for the U.S. to impede an Ebola outbreak here in America. Ebola, let's examine this issue head on. Ebola poses a severe threat to our U.S. healthcare and air travel industries. Um, Flu.gov describes a pandemic as a global disease outbreak that is characterized by how the disease spread versus the number of people that dies from it. The Ebola virus is very contagious when someone is symptomatic, such as a headache along with a fever of 101.5. The World Health Organization suggests that if a person flies from West Africa with these symptoms, they must seek immediate medical attention. In 2007, there was a proposal released, and it was called the Federal Restrictions Air Travel for Health Purposes. This proposal suggests that when a person has a communicable disease, such as the Ebola virus, they should be restricted from traveling on commercial aircraft because they pose a health risk for those who are traveling. They should not be allowed to travel in or out of the United States. As of October 21st, 2014, the U.S. Homeland Security has required any persons traveling from Sierra Leone, Guinea, or Liberia to travel into one of the five U.S. airports listed right here, because these airports have the ability to monitor for the Ebola virus. Now that we understand that the United States is trying to implement measures for the Ebola virus, let's take a look at the health screenings that are required by the U.S. airports. We all understand and know that Thomas Eric Duncan flew into Dallas, Texas from Liberia on September the 19th. He showed symptoms of the Ebola virus. We didn't know that at that point, but he answered no on his airport departure questionnaire when it was asked if he had come in contact with someone infected with the Ebola virus. According to the USA Today, this is not a guarantee to stop people from traveling. The dilemma with the Ebola-related screenings is a person cannot be symptomatic at the time of the questionnaire, but they can be symptomatic days later. This was also noted back in 2003 with the bird flu and SARS pandemic. A Canadian study was done, according to Fox News, that the individuals were not symptomatic, and it largely due to the fact that passengers were taking over-the-counter painkillers to mask their fevers. And many experts believe this could become a potential problem for the Ebola-related screenings. The Ebola-related screenings involve using a no-touch thermometer, seen right here. But if the individual has a fever, they're going to be moved to another station where they're asked questions. If the questions determine that this person has been a possible high risk of the Ebola exposure, then at that point they will be moved into a quarantine at the airport. Now that we're aware of the measurements that the government is trying to take to prevent the Ebola virus from spreading, let's take a look at the aid workers. If you're not aware, Doctors Without Borders, the American Red Cross, the World Health Organization, and Samaritan Purse are some of the organizations that employ aid workers to go over to other countries, such as West African countries, to combat diseases such as the Ebola virus. The Centers of the Disease Control requires that these individuals learn about the Ebola virus and that they follow certain tips such as notifying the doctors 4 to 6 weeks prior to their travels, getting the necessary medical equipment such as a protective gear, making sure that you have health insurance that will cover you in case you do become infected with the Ebola virus, as well as having a plan back to the United States if you do become infected. So how will you travel back to the United States with the infection of the Ebola virus? U.S. aid workers are not allowed to travel on commercial air flights because of the potential exposure to the deadly disease, and they are allowed to do a 21-day monitor policy. It's not a quarantine, but it's a monitor, such as the case of Dr. Craig Spencer, who traveled from Guinea to New York on October the 17th. His monitor policy, he passed all the screenings, and his monitor policy wasn't that well because 6 days later he succumbed to the Ebola virus, but he had participated in a lot of public activities. Also, the fact that these aid workers wear protective gear, such as this right here, and they're always changing and disinfecting, doesn't mean that they won't get the Ebola virus. Case in point, Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Ritbowl were infected with the Ebola virus, but they consistently changed in and out of those protective gear. You know, we understand that the aid workers must do their job, but it is not a guarantee that if they only monitor themselves and put on the protective gear that they won't get the Ebola virus. Some experts that do not agree with the air ban policy feel that if we do not, that if we do put an air ban policy in place, that the individuals from West African countries will gain entry into the United States. A lot of government officials don't agree with the air ban policy, as myself, because they feel like that we are doing the best that we can by allowing the Ebola screenings to monitor for the Ebola virus. In conclusion, the Ebola virus is very deadly. We must know how to stop it. It is raging over in West Africa, and I don't agree that the Ebola screenings are 100% guarantee for being able to identify the Ebola virus. I urge those who must travel to West Africa to please take a social responsibility and isolate yourself from public activities, because if we do not, we might have a global pandemic in our hands. Having that mindset to make sure that you quarantine yourself for a maximum of 21 days, because that's how long the virus takes to manifest in your body, will ensure that you have done all that you can to make sure that America is safe.